Welcome back, listeners. Today, we're taking a deep dive into one of those cases that just gets under your skin.
Oh, I know the type you mean, the ones that keep you up at night.
Exactly. Today, it's Aileen Wuornos, a name synonymous with America's first female serial killer.
A figure shrouded in myth and misconception.
Which is why we're here, right? We've got court records, biographies, interviews, the whole nine yards.
Trying to sift through it all.
To understand the woman behind the headlines.
The forces that might lead someone down such a dark path.
And let's be clear, this isn't about glorifying violence.
Not at all, it's about understanding it.
So where do we even begin with a story like this?
Well, it's tempting to jump straight to the murders, but I think the real starting point is her childhood.
Eileen's early years, they're just heartbreaking. I mean, abandoned by her mother at 4 years old.
Raised by her grandparents, and by her own account, the abuse started there.
It makes you wonder, what kind of impact does that have on a child?
And we can't forget about her father, a convicted child sex offender who committed suicide in prison before she was even born.
A shadow hanging over her life, even if she never knew him.
It really paints a picture of a life steeped in trauma from the very beginning.
It's like, how do you even begin to process that as a kid?
And then, as a teenager, pregnant at 14.
Ostracized by her community. It's a recipe for instability.
And that instability follows her right into adulthood.
Yeah, drifting, running away, changing her name multiple times.
Petty theft, assault charges, even armed robbery. It's like she's constantly trying to outrun her past.
But the past has a way of catching up, doesn't it?
And for Aileen, that reckoning came in the form of Tyria Moore.
Her lover. This relationship, it's often simplified.
Painted as just a love affair, but is much more complex than that.
Moore becomes financially dependent on Wuornos.
And Wuornos, she's working as a prostitute to survive.
It's a precarious existence. Always on the move, living on the fringes.
And it's during this period, between 1989 and 1990, that things take a dark turn. A very dark turn.
Because this is when the murders begin.
7 men, all killed within a year. Their names: Richard Mallory, David Spears, Charles Carskadden, Troy Burris, Dick Humphreys, Walter Geno Antonio.
Each one, a life cut short, a family left devastated.
And then there's Peter Seams. His body was never found.
Adding another layer of mystery to an already haunting case.
And initially, Wuornos claimed self-defense,
Saying all 7 men had either raped her or attempted to.
painting herself as a victim, fighting back against her attackers.
And, I mean, given the dangers of prostitution, that narrative probably resonated with some people, right?
Absolutely. The idea of a woman taking down violent men who prey on the vulnerable. It's a powerful image.
But then the story shifts. She recants that blanket self-defense claim.
Admits that some, but not all of the murders were in self-defense.
So which is it? Was she a cold-blooded killer? A desperate woman fighting back? Or something else entirely?
And then, adding another layer of intrigue, there's this interview where she confesses she chose the death penalty.
Because she couldn't bear the thought of life in prison.
It makes you wonder, was this a genuine desire to control her fate? Or a calculated move to manipulate public perception? Or maybe a bit of both.
It feels like we're looking through a fogged-up window.
Glimpses of truth, but never a completely clear view.
So how do we make sense of it all? How do we untangle the threads of this story and find the truth?
That's what we'll try to unravel as we delve deeper into the legal proceedings and the media frenzy that surrounded this case.
A case that captivated the nation and continues to fascinate us to this day. Okay, so we've got this woman, Aileen Wuornos, claiming self-defense for some murders but not others. It just doesn't seem to add up. How did this all play out in court?
Well, it was a media circus, to say the least. Every little detail was splashed across the headlines.
And how was she portrayed?
The prosecution, they painted her as this cold, calculating predator.
And the defense.
They tried to show her humanity, highlighting that horrific childhood, arguing she was driven by fear.
But what about the evidence? Was there anything to support her self-defense claims?
Some of the forensic evidence was pretty ambiguous, but there's one detail that always stuck with me. Richard Mallory, her first victim, he was a convicted rapist.
Wait, really? And that wasn't allowed in court?
Nope. The judge ruled it irrelevant.
But how? If she's claiming self-defense, wouldn't that be crucial context?
The defense definitely thought so. They argued it gave the jury a skewed perspective.
It's like they were only seeing part of the story, not the whole picture.
Exactly. And whether that impacted the verdict, well, we'll never know for sure.
But she was found guilty.
6 death sentences, 1 for each murder.
Wow. 6 death sentences. That's heavy. How did she react?
Defiant. Still maintaining her innocence in some of the murders.
But then, things started to get even stranger, right?
Her behavior became increasingly erratic. Accusations of mistreatment in prison started flying.
Like what?
Tampering with her food, psychological torture. She even claimed the guards were trying to drive her insane.
Oh, wow. Were those accusations ever investigated?
Some were, but they were ultimately dismissed.
I mean, it's tough to separate truth from paranoia in a case like this.
Especially with someone like Wuornos, who had a history of, well, let's just say playing with the truth.
So here she is, facing this bleak future, trapped in a system she saw as corrupt. What happened next?
She fired her lawyer, dropped all her appeals, even accused her own brother of being involved in the murders.
It's almost as if she was pushing everyone away.
And in a way she was, almost like she was embracing her own fate.
And then there are those final words right before her execution.
I'm sailing with the rock and I'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus, June 6th, like the movie, big mothership and all, I'll be back.
I mean, what do you even make of that?
Some see it as delusional ramblings, others as a defiant message to the world that condemned her.
It's just another layer of mystery in a case that's full of them. So where do we go from here? How do we try to make sense of a story as complicated as Aileen Wuornos's?
I think it starts by acknowledging the complexity, resisting the urge to simplify, to label her as just a monster. We have to look at all of it. The trauma, the violence, the contradictions.
And maybe by doing that, by digging deeper, we can find some kind of understanding.
Maybe even a glimmer of hope, that by confronting these dark corners of humanity, we can learn something, maybe even prevent similar tragedies from happening again.
I feel like we've been digging deeper and deeper down this rabbit hole. And with every layer, it just gets more and more complex.
Well, that's true crime for you, right? We want those neat and tidy answers, but reality is rarely so clear-cut.
And Aileen Wuornos, she's a perfect example. We've covered so much ground already. You know, her childhood trauma, the murders, her self-defense claims, those final cryptic words. But after all of that, I'm left wondering, where do we go from here? What have we learned?
I think one of the biggest takeaways is the danger of trying to oversimplify. We love to categorize people, good or evil, victim or villain, but Aileen Wuornos doesn't fit neatly into any of those boxes.
She's a product of both nature and nurture, right? This really complicated mix of factors.
Exactly. It's not about excusing her actions. It's about understanding the path that led her there. And that requires empathy.
Not sympathy, right?
Right. We don't have to condone what she did. But to really understand her, we have to acknowledge the pain she experienced, the trauma that likely fueled her rage.
It's like we're looking at a shattered mosaic. Each piece, each event in her life, contributes to the overall picture. But only when you step back can you really see it. See the broken humanity beneath it all.
And even then, there are still missing pieces, questions we may never be able to answer.
That's part of what makes her story so unsettling. So how do we, the listeners, even begin to process all of this? What do we take away from this deep dive?
I think we need to be mindful of how we consume true crime. It's easy to get caught up in the sensationalism of it all, but we have to remember, these are real lives, real tragedies, and we have a responsibility to approach these stories thoughtfully with a critical eye.
Maybe even a bit of humility too, right? Recognizing that we may never fully understand the depths of another person's darkness.
Absolutely. It's about acknowledging the limits of our understanding, embracing the uncomfortable truths these stories often reveal about ourselves, about our society, about the human psyche. It's about using them not just for entertainment, but for reflection, for growth, for a deeper understanding of the world and everything in it.
Well, listeners, I don't know about you, but my mind is definitely spinning. Aileen Wuornos' story is a stark reminder that the line between victim and perpetrator can be so blurry. It reminds us how much our pasts shape our presents, and that even in the darkest of hearts, you can still find those flickers of humanity. And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder this one. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.